Today, Leslie Snavely is joining us. Leslie is the president of CHG Healthcare, a healthcare staffing and technology company with thousands of employees. Okay, we're going to discuss a few different things about leadership and product. First, paths to change. Second, product innovation. Third, leadership. Fourth, deliberate empowerment of women. And I love that last one. Okay, a lot to cover around leadership and products. Let's learn together. Welcome to the podcast.
It's good to see you.
It's nice to see you too. To set a little context, I thought we'd dive into some of your background because your background also has transitions and also has gone through some evolution over time. And we've find that how leaders lead dramatically affects kind of the value and the experience that customers get out of said product organization. So that's a little bit of why we're diving into this. So if I've done my homework correctly, I think at one place I noticed you wrote, I started off in finance, then led sales, digital transformations, and now president. You've gone a wide variety, a wide spectrum of things. What caught me about that is you've done some transition, come from more of a back office sort of roles and experiences to more customer facing and executive leadership type roles. Obviously, through that transition, you need to know your customers. You need to learn your customers differently than if you're doing a back office type role. So a little bit of question is that in that vein is, how did you go about learning that process? How was that transition for you? Yeah. And was there anything particularly useful to you as you went through that transition? If other people are doing some sort of similar transition or looking to that, is there anything useful out of your experience that would stand out for them?
Well, it's funny. It's a good question. I have to think about these things. So first of all, I was in finance for 3 or 4 years. So finance was my degree. It is how I came out of school. I'm a math-minded human. That's kind of how I got into that. But I went to work for Procter & Gamble. And, as you probably know, Procter & Gamble is a product and a brand company, right? And so I was surrounded from almost the first day that I set foot as an intern, right, in the late 90s, around a company that put a ton of value on creating kind of the best in class things, whatever the thing. I started working on Jif peanut butter. And then I went on to work for Folgers coffee, and both of those were in the finance functions. And but from literally day one, the company really surrounds itself with a philosophy about the consumer of the product is it's literally, they say the consumer is boss. It's one of, and this is years and years ago. Right. I'm sure they say it much more eloquently now. But the concept that the consumer of what you make is who pays your bills. It's why you do what you do. And whether you are a back office, front office, customer facing, HR, you are indoctrinated in that culture out of the gates. And so I would say, maybe unlike others who make the move from a back office to a front office, I never felt like I wasn't in it for the consumer, no matter the function that I played. Yeah. And so that kind of mindset, I think, is something that, as I then did transition literally right over to what is the brand and product management function, product management wasn't a thing then, right? This is before it was cool.
It's more recent.
Was products, like the hard stuff, right? The product. This is what it was. And so you are just hardwired to learn about the consumer's perspective because that's how the company succeeded. And so when you made the move then for me at Procter & Gamble from finance to brand and product management, your number one priority is to learn and discover the needs of the consumer, to do the right product design, sales strategy, marketing design, execution, business model change, you name it, that's centered on the consumer as the reason we were there, right? And so I think with that in mind, it was easy, right? So to your question, was it hard to transition from the back to the front office? It was hard in different ways, but not in the way of trying to focus on learning the customer. And really trying really hard to put yourself in the shoes of your buyer, with knowing you're not your buyer, like doing that separation. So many people inadvertently say, well, I was working on Folgers. I drink coffee, right? Well, I mean, I drink coffee for me, Leslie. I wasn't the holistic consumer for Folgers coffee. So there's just so many training programs and so much expectation that that's what you do that I think it became kind of common nature for me just to like, that's just what I did. And over the years, I've had to really
Mhm.
accept that not all places are like that, right? And that was a luxury to be at a company that put that at the center and learn the techniques and the tactics and all the ways to learn about the customer, in their words, the consumer, and then teach it to others, right? Because so often, especially if you're in a more common product, you assume yourself as the consumer, right? And teaching people to be curious and to discover the true needs, things that are maybe unstated, unknown, but needed. And that started super early in my career.
Sounds like you had a great start there.
It sounds like you had a great start to your point, Josh, but also like that's interesting to me. With finance, I've noticed consumers are not part of the mindset. Typically, it's about like bottom line, it's about margins, it's about other things. And so that's an interesting framework, like you said, and maybe that's unique, like you said, to that company that helped bridge that for you about like customers, money, revenue, all that kind of stuff, and what does that mean? And then progressing to the next thing. Do you feel like that is unique, or do you feel like it's just more like what you took from that?
I think it's unique. I would consider, I spent 8.5 years there, I think in total. I would consider it the best training ground for customer thinking that I could have ever had, right? So I would say it's unique in that respect. It's expected. But I also think I've seen it in other places too, maybe just not as, that was a big multinational Fortune 50 company, right? So they had the resources to employ methods and practices to help the whole organization get customer centered. Other companies, smaller places, they don't maybe have the resources, the structure, or the formality of it. But I believe in managing and leading multifunctional teams. And if you do that well, if you as a leader put together teams of multifunctional people, such as finance and sales and marketing and design and all the pieces, the inherent work of teamwork teaches people to have a customer centricity, right? And where companies I've been a part of that have not done that well, then it's very siloed. To your point, finance is about the money. Where companies have done that well, the money is only made if the customer is satisfied. Does that make sense? And there's a big cultural difference.
Yeah.
That's a great statement about kind of the cross-cultural or the cross-discipline teams and the customer-centric result of that. There was another nugget that I picked from your background where you're talking a little bit about your career advancement. And I want to ask about this in relation to how the culture of the organization. So we just talked about the culture of Procter & Gamble, in this case, setting you up well for customer-centric thinking. There's the culture of an organization affects a lot of things, obviously. And one thing that I pulled from your background was this idea of, I think you mentioned something about your career journey and the idea of so many things kind of happening at the moment they just happened because you were ready for them. And you didn't necessarily always take the should, quote unquote, should path, which really was, I found an interesting post. But I think that applies to organizations quite a bit too. And so we talked about customer-centric organizations, but I was curious about how that applied in terms of how you lead your organization or in your leadership, in terms of like, how do I avoid the should and that sort of pull that is, the playbook that everybody has? How do I avoid that to do what's actually right?
That's a great question. I would just say that, and just from my background, like, why did that come to be? Like, I grew up in rural America in a very small town, in a town where there was service industries only. My parents were both in the education profession, tons of great people, great relationships. But so what was the should at that time in my career was to do that, right? And so I just from the very beginning have had a mentality that shoulding people is really bad. Like, it's a bad practice, like humans do, right? Because it's a judgmental statement and placing your perspective on others. And so if you say, well, you should have worked out this morning, or you should eat more vegetables, you're pressing your perspective on others, and that limits the self-discovery in someone, to enable them to find what they can do, not what they should do. So if you think about that, that's my belief structure as a human. Apply that to my career, apply that to how I lead companies. So if you think about the choices you face as a business person, every single day, every single week, quarter, month, there are people doing it a way, right? There are people doing it this way or that way. And if you only look at the patterns of the ways it is done, or it should be done, right? Use that, you very likely will miss the opportunity to be unique. And so for many of us, right, like we want to sell goods and services and products, and we want to find a way to be unique at what we do. And if you do what you should do, which is generally what others do, then you're by definition not being unique. So I think there's the mentality of it. And it doesn't mean, by the way, that doesn't mean I don't like best practices, because you can read it that way, right? You can read it, well, if you do what others do, you're actually applying the best thing to do. There are times when that's incredibly relevant. So it's about applying this concept to the right things, right? To the most important things, where you allow yourself to find uniqueness in how your proposition, and for me, my career proposition, for companies, their business proposition can make it, an incremental positive step. You don't have to do it on everything. In other words, you don't want to, reinvent everything, because that's about having a lack of priorities. You want to do that within the most important spaces.
Well, you mentioned the idea of self-discovery, like opening it up for self-discovery. And to me, I think to hinge on that, like in order to be effectively unique requires some self-awareness about when it actually makes sense. And so I think those two go hand in hand. There's another post that you had that really stood out as well. Again, talking about leadership and this idea of self-awareness even. But you talked about growth mindset and optimism kind of related to that, and the value that has. And obviously, there's lots of research about individuals having growth mindsets and how that plays out. I'm curious about, first, if you could quickly define how the words real quick for maybe the listeners who aren't familiar with growth mindset. But then secondly, like, how does that play out? It's obviously something you try and embody. How does that play out, again, in your leadership, in your work, and in how you deal with customers? Where does it play out?
Yeah, great question. I mean, in the most broad terms, right? What is growth mindset? I think you just have to think about it about, being fixed is the opposite of growing, right? So you just think about it as plainly as that. And if something is fixed, it doesn't change. It represents where you've been, maybe not where you're going. And growth mindset is embracing a mindset to not do that. Does that make sense? To embrace a mindset to be open to change, to be open to learn. So that's just the most basic way I would define it. So, I think when it comes to being a leader, I happen today at CHG to lead a very large team, right? You're close to 4,000 people. And, people inherently want to succeed, right? So people come in to a job, to their life, inherently wanting to succeed. And you often succeed based on patterns of the past. You say, well, I saw this person succeed and they succeeded by doing this. And so inherently, just kind of in a professional landscape, it probably applies personally as well, we see patterns and things around us that are successful. And then inherently, if we act in those ways, it has a look back point of view. It's looking back at something more fixed, right? Than looking and thinking about future. Yeah. So I think it's this, like, I believe wholeheartedly that to be a good leader, you have to help people to grow their growth mindset, right? Their ability to change, adapt, widen their view, and maybe see things that they cannot see inherently, because again, they're trying to succeed based on patterns of the past. And some people have inherently more match to that concept, and some people have inherently less personality match to that concept. And so as a leader, our job is really to kind of find and just help people a little bit more along the way, like nudging towards the next step for them as a coach. And so I believe in it a lot. I don't know if I answered your question, but I believe that the concept of growth mindset and an openness to change and think differently and being kind of an openness and positivity that change can be better than be negative, right? I think it's kind of the place that I personally start as a leader. And I think the organizations I've been involved in, business organizations that succeed the most, are willing to embrace that. They're willing to, it doesn't mean they want to go from being a, deliberate, like our company, we've been around for 45 years. We have excellent results. We have an excellent track record from history. So you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're just saying, can I nudge it? Can I move it? Can I slightly increase our aperture so we can have more opportunity in the future? So.
And it sounds like, and this is my interpretation, growth mindset is more on the individual management level. Yes, there is a corporate idea or leadership idea, but what you just mentioned was about how to empower others to do that. I've seen a little bit of that, having worked at CHG many years back. Is it more on the individual versus the corporate, or both?
I think, oh man, I can get into culture theory here. So it is most definitely.
I know. I saw both that you just said, and I was like,
most definitely
I've seen both.
Individual. So I will answer your question. It is how a person comes to a problem and their approach, or an opportunity, whatever you call the thing, right? And their approach to it. So it's most definitely individual, and thus can be coached, can be learned, can be molded.
Sure.
And then in general, a culture of a company, or this can happen in your friend groups, and this is not just about work. The culture, I believe a culture is the sum of all the behaviors of all the people in the thing. Okay. So if you know that's what I believe a culture is, then the more behaviors that people have that are growth mindset oriented, the more the culture is growth mindset oriented. The more the culture has a fixed mindset, the more the people, the individuals, the more the culture, and it's a combination of all of that. So I think it is a culture also. That's probably the best way to say.
That makes sense.
That actually, it kind of reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, Jeremy, in terms of the evolution of CHG. So the growth mindset as an organization plays out in terms of how you adapt as an organization.
Right.
Obviously, markets change, products change, et cetera, et cetera. Jeremy and I were talking earlier about some of the changes that CHG has done over the years in terms of product services. Maybe you can introduce that, Jer.
Yeah. Well, just what is the product? And I think that's tricky. It's been interesting because CHG has been primarily a staffing company, and they offer jobs. That's the product, but that's evolved throughout the years. And so I was hoping you could speak through that a little bit about the evolution of where did you think about service, a job as a product, and then how has that evolved into your idea of now offering products?
Yeah, great question. So maybe at the core of it, so CHG is the largest physician staffing company in the country. So just start there. 45 years doing physician staffing. We also do other things, but that's still at the core of our business, right? So physician staffing. So if you say, what are the products that we sell? We sell service in matching physicians' career time to patient care opportunities. At the core of it. Actually, we don't sell jobs. We don't sell jobs at all, I would say. That is not our product. Our product is physician time to be placed in care settings where care is needed. So in order to sell the physician time, in order to sell that, what do you have to be great at in order to sell it? Of course, you're also selling to the physician. You have to convince the physician to work in the job. So there's a sales, there is a product there. There is our product says no. So you have to think about this like it's a human. It's a human who's been trained till they're 35 and educated and talented. who can provide healthcare in any setting they choose because there's not enough doctors to go around. So, okay, you start there. So selling and building a product of service to the physician and ultimately the hospital to create a best match is the product that CHG sells. The complexity of doing it requires a lot of subproducts to make that happen, right? So we put, of your hospital, you may need physicians, you may need nurses, you may need rehab therapists, you may need technology tools to do your job. You may need expedited credentialing support, which is about getting the quality checked of our clinicians. All of those things. You may need consulting services because your recruitment department is too complicated and you want to simplify it. These are all ways that we can add value because we're experts in matching physicians to patient needs that are hard to fill. And so all of those kind of product service lines become a part of our repertoire on the client, on the hospital side. Simultaneously, on the physician side, I mean, a physician has more opportunities than is imaginable probably for any of us, even though we work in markets with low unemployment. I mean, these are employment markets where, there's 1 in 3 physicians will retire in the next decade. So the gaps in care that could be created if a physician doesn't really work at the top of their license in the most efficient way and the most effective way for their skill. So we help the doctor make all of that happen. And that means we need strong service. It means we need incredibly strong specialization, understanding on the sales side, how to place a cardiovascular surgeon. I mean, it's not a, the depth of knowledge we have to help and deliver.
That's not easy.
That person is high, right? Now, we also need technology tools. We've expanded our products to offer tech solutions to make the physician's life easier. That physician, they're kind of busy, right? I mean, they have a lot they can give and they're clinically trained, and we don't really want them doing administrative paperwork. That's hard, difficult. We want to make that easier. Okay, there's a product solution in there to help do that. So if you, at the core of it, you say, we bring physicians to where patient care is needed, you start there and you explore the product line. Underneath that, you find all the divergent services and products that I think our company is excellent at and will continue to get better at over time. And all of that change, right, going from where we were, which is we placed doctors in jobs, to that spectrum of products and service is the change we've been on and underway on for a decade, right? And and so I think that's the growth mindset kind of at play in a company.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like an evolution, right? Like like you said, placing physicians or doctors, nurses in jobs seems very, almost binary. But what you're talking about is more complex. It's more like, what does the physician want? What does a nurse need? And what do the hospital system needs? And then you saw opportunity in there. Question there. How did you know that? How did you discover that? What led you to some of those changes that you did?
Yeah, I think it's the most
like
basic way.
Research audience.
Yeah, go back to kind of what I was trained at Procter & Gamble, the consumer is boss, right? So I spent a lot of time, and my teams did, doing research, from quantitative research to qualitative research to ideation sessions around the research, to pitching some concepts early on and getting shut down, and so all the way back in time, but in the most basic of format, it's like pure listening to our customer for the problems they were up against, and then using our knowledge, right, our expertise, right, our point of difference is on how to pull it and make it happen. And I think what's interesting, right, and I'm certain you probably talk to other leaders in most product and user research, et cetera, and as you do, like, the one thing I see that doesn't always happen is there's some propensity that as you do research, you're expecting your customer to tell you what to do. The customer does not know what to do. They know the problem they're dealing with. They know the They know what they expect from the problem, where the real, but they're not going to serve you the $1 million idea, right? It's about putting creativity, innovation, design thinking against that.
Yeah, and not only that, it's one person or one idea versus a trend of things, right? So it's like, yes, plus like there has to be something that causes you to do action rather than one person saying something, right?
And well, this is where my finance background helps a ton, because then you have to match, like, does satisfying that customer thing actually deliver you a business proposition? And that's
Exactly.
the general manager's kind of mindset placed against product design, because you're not just designing for fun. I mean, we are for-profit enterprise. Like, it's, we're trying to do this in a way that gets all these things met. But I think it's an important...
Even nonprofits that we've been talking with, even nonprofits, we've been talking to nonprofits. It's like the same thing. They have to be efficient no matter what. Like it's you're onto something. You have to have a goal that's not just about listening to X person. It's about listening to a trend or something that will grow. Ultimately, that connection, right, between product and users.
And I would tell you, this is where the longevity in an industry can help you a ton if you allow a growth mindset. Because I have talked, over 13 and a half years now, leading a physician staffing company today, but all the way back to being a head of marketing and starting a product function and all those pieces. Do you know the number of customers over time I have actually seen the trends develop with and watched? So if you pop between companies, and this is something it's important to improve your skills at rapid learning, because you don't have that tenure to reside on in terms of market expertise, right? And the beauty of a place like CHG is we retain people, and as long as we stay growth mindset, that actually turns into tremendous customer insights in the organization.
Yeah, great tribal knowledge.
Yeah, that's awesome.
One question for you on the evolution and the addition of the pyramid of physicians at top and all this other services and products that have gone around that. Some of those services and products have been other staffing things, i.e., other practitioners, nurses, et cetera. Yeah. Some of those things, I think you mentioned technology and software platforms. Those are different. What have you found any particular structure to work well in, I guess, how you orient your product teams in terms of digesting the information you just talked about, where customers aren't going to tell you explicitly what they want. They'll talk about the need. And then you have to then interpret that from the trends. Have you found a particular structure to work really well in how you organize your product teams in that to that degree?
Great question. We've tried so many different things over time. So I just, there are definitely a lot of wins in there. And some swings and misses. But what I would say where we currently sit today is we have a set of product teams oriented externally, and they're oriented against particular problems or customer sets, right? So an example of that would be, we bought a technology company a couple of years ago. The name of the company is Locum Smart. If you're not in our industry, you don't kind of even know what that is. Locums is our industry. And that product is specifically targeted against a larger health system that has a centralized recruiting department that has a lot to manage, really big scale to manage. And so again, that's a customer product team and all those corresponding components of user research and design and software development. So that's one, and we have many examples of that. Okay, so that's one side. On the flip of it, we have an internal product team. We are a people service company, and I think it's important to recognize, to get the external done, you need the internal to work and correspond to providing excellent service. And so this kind of structure we have, instead of internal product teams and a set of external product teams who their customer and user base is designed, or their team structure is designed to really get really deep in the journey of the user. So on the internal side, we have 1,500 recruiters. So they spend their time every day talking to doctors and hospitals about that match I'm talking about. Well, if they're not great at what they do and don't have the right tool set, process design, user experience in the technology, then they will be less good at working with that Locum Smart product I talked about on the outside. So we have a kind of an internal, external structure that really paths along the journey of those different customers. That's been the most successful. That's where we are today. There'll be something else we think of that may be better. We also have a dedicated user research team that is more centralized, and they're tasked and assigned different places over time, but they really build kind of the best practices of user research. And by having that kind of best practice center, we learn from them in all the different streams of our product teams, right? So a little bit of centralization, a little bit of autonomy. At a company as big as us, it's not a startup, right? There's a lot of scale technology we have to run. So having both sides of that.
You just mentioned like the teams, like centralized teams versus kind of like maybe within org teams or whatever. I'm curious about your approach when you were looking at creating products or, consuming products as you're, doing that for external companies. What were the key things that you had to deal with as far as team structure and creating really a product muscle within CHG?
Yeah. So for history, we used to run an IT organization, and we still have an IT services organization, by the way. We have lots of things to do there. And now we also have a product development organization. So I was able to stand that up in the years. So that's important to know when I say this. The biggest, I would say the biggest roadblock or challenge in the product side is balancing my sense in general. And, I come from product management, like physical products, like I said earlier, like I come from making this bottle. And, and we hired a lot of people over time that have come in from the kind of tech-only non-service product organizations. And so the challenge is translating a product skill set to, no matter where you came from, whether you came from this company or the technology company, into a service-enabled or technology-enabled service company. That's what we are, technology-enabled service company. And so, people learn a set of product skills, whichever direction they came from, and it's really often hard for them to broaden it to say, whoa, there's 1,500 recruiters that do a lot of the product delivery. I got to think very differently about how to apply my product knowledge into that environment where you have sales and product and marketing and operations all in the customer journey. And in general, that muscle, like that product management skill set, the user design, user research, user experience design, people come from one bias, and to have people learn to cross over and do both well, I think has been probably one of the larger challenges on the talent development side. I don't know. Maybe that's common. Maybe it's not. I would say that's probably been the largest for us.
So what advice would you have? Like, you just say someone else is trying to deal with that type of thing. I know you guys are unique, but that idea of like, I have a service and I'm packaging that service as a product, and I might be doing my own products that are different, like a side hustle. What advice would you have for organizations that are thinking about a similar transition?
I think the number one thing that has helped and or hurt if we didn't do it well, and there's always sometimes we're doing, is to respect all the functions it takes to run a company. So my advice is really like what is the value proposition for your organization and for your sale? And really learning to respect all the components of that from a business framework it takes to deliver that. And if someone's coming in, no matter whether you're coming in sales or marketing or product management or you're a software engineer, whatever it may be, you have to like, I'm good at this, others are good at that. It takes all of us to make this win. And that's the advice I would give people that go through it. Where I've seen it be hard for us or others, and I've mentored a good amount of people on this, is when I hear product management professionals come in and say, I am the CEO of the product. And they say it with a mindset.
That's exactly what I was told.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was told at Adobe for my thing.
And they say it in the mindset, and I know this, by the way, I work with our CEO. I know what it's like to be the CEO of something because I work side by side with him. People perceive that means being in control of the product. CEOs don't control organizations, they lead them. So that the
Yeah.
premise of being a CEO of a product is actually incredibly strong, incredibly strong. Being the inspirational leader to solve a problem, to rally the troops, to get to an outcome. Those are all the good things of the CEO of a product language, but people misinterpret it to being
Yeah.
in control and my way or the highway. And that's the thing. The advice I would give folks is to do it the way it's intended to be. The CEO is a leader for an outcome, right? And not what kind of power and control, or I get to make the final. Does that make sense? And that kind of anyone approaching it, building an org for that, or being a person, I just think you need to. My advice would be you would need to think really hard about your approach in the work to make sure you're doing it the better way, like the leadership way.
I think that's great advice, because I was said, you're CEO of this thing. However, work with all these partners and you don't own any of it. It's like, huh?
Yeah,
It's a very interesting.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting balance. And so I think what you said is spot on, which is more inspirational leader, and maybe inspiration for what's going to happen versus my way or the highway. I think that's very spot on, because there's no chance that it's going to be a standalone. You do your own thing, right?
Well, I think it's bad of us as leaders, and I put myself in this camp, to say it without explaining it. I said this to people when they joined our organization at CHG, and I just assume they know what it's like to be the CEO of something, but they don't. They're not a CEO of something. So I think we as leaders in this product leadership, or just any leaders, honestly, business leaders, we owe being more crisp about what we mean, how to teach it, how to coach it. I'm certain whoever told you that, their intention was for you, that they thought you got it in their mind, right? But it's about coming to mutual alignment and coaching to work through it in the best way for the outcomes, right? We're stewards of our companies and our people, and I think it's just really, really, really important.
Love it. Josh, go ahead.
Great. Yeah. So that actually transitions really well, because we're running out of time here. So I'll wrap up real quick. There's a couple of things that have stood out in this conversation, and a lot of it is kind of about effective leadership and growth mindset, and a lot of that stuff then in an organization filtering down through how the organization functions. If you are the good example and illustrate effectively what a good CEO can look like, then people can really be CEOs of their individual product, and it works out all right. So this culture has a huge cascading effect.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to shift just slightly. And as we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about women in leadership. And I know that's a topic that's important to you. It's a topic that's important to me as well. I saw a stat, I look at it real quick. 63% of CHG's workforce are women, and 52% of CHG's leaders are women. So you guys are obviously doing better than the norm, I would say, in this area, which is fantastic. So I kind of wanted to think about forward. This is a topic that has grown. It's become more important in society, which is amazing. And there have been companies like CHG which have made inroads in this. Mm-hmm. So as you think forward with this topic about like, how do we empower women in the workforce, specifically leadership, what gives you optimism looking forward in that?
Oh, that's a great question. I have a ton of optimism, so and it's
Good.
founded in the concept that I meet so many talented humans from every walk of life, whether they're female, male, black, white. It's an amazing. I see them at CHG. I see them in our community here in Utah. I see them when I travel around the country. And so I see kind of the best of the talent pool of what's to come. And so that's what gives me optimism. And what I think what could give you pessimism or skepticism on that is how, Leslie, that's probably been there forever. Why isn't it different, right? And so what I see is today's college graduates, people in their 20s. I see maybe like just a lack of some of the history biases that many people like me had, and a generation older than me. and a little bit of a fearlessness, right, to take on challenges in a way I didn't see a decade ago even. So that's good. I do see problems, and I think most of the problems are about generally unconscious bias more than conscious bias in organizations. And so I spend a lot of time, and I think we all should, in encouraging those talented people who may be hiding their voice because they may not realize it could be heard, helping nudge those individuals to sign up, raise their hand, bring their voice, and encourage the maturity of the voice to grow. And so it's a lot about coaching people. And I see if all of us take that on, the talent is there. And I would say that's what we've done at CHG. We spend a ton of time giving line level, diverse candidates to raise their hand for leadership positions by giving them a forum to express themselves, by telling them and showing them we appreciate that, and it's not as hard as it seems, but it has to be deliberate. Time can pass and you may just not do it, right? And so I think we all, as leaders, no matter whether we run companies, organizations, we're just leaders of our friends, we own the nudge. We own seeing the talent and pushing the nudge to help build confidence. And in the female, in the gender discussion, I would just say that there are many women try to come to perfection before they raise their hand. And so that nudge is just incredibly important when it comes to women in the workforce.
Great. That leads me to my very last question, a very short little question. I have a daughter who's entering high school this year. As she thinks about the workforce in the years ahead, I was wondering what sort of advice you had for her. And one little piece of advice you just mentioned was don't try and be perfect before you start, that kind of thing. Anything else come to mind?
I'll go back to where we started maybe. And, don't let people tell you what you should do.
Yeah. Right.
And now that's hard. It sounds easier than it sounds easy.
Yeah.
Right. Because sometimes you want to know what you should do. Right. So, but being able to embrace self-discovery about what you want to be, what you want to do with no expectation that it's any one thing. There's no should, right? That someone else is putting their judgment on you. It's about you deciding where you want to go. So
great.
Hopefully that helps.
Thanks.
Before I close, I went to leadership thing and they said, don't let anyone bullshit on you. So that sounds very familiar.
Bullshit?
Should. Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
I think my quote I always say is there's never been a box I didn't want to break out of.
Nice.
I say as I'm sitting in the Zoom box right now.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us and talking through some of your history here with your leadership, caveats that you've said to us and the things that we should consider, but then also like with products and how that works for your users and how that has worked for CHG. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's nice to see you. And I hope to see you in person. Sometime soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
Hi, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate it if you could leave a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help spread the word. Our podcast is produced and designed by Jeremy and Joshua Wold. You can find our show archive and transcripts at productsforpeoplepodcast.com. We look forward to seeing you for our next episode, and in the meantime, we hope you experience some really great products. Thanks.